did Ngugi's writing speak to you as a Kenyan or to the Kenya that you are living in at the time? Did you feel like it was capturing your world or your reality?
Ngugi's books are not just works of fiction that entertain you. Ngugi's books are actually history books. When you read the entire collection of Ngugi's books, especially the earlier parts, you talk about Weep Not Child, A River Between, then later A Grain of Wheat, even Satan on the Cross, or the Wizard of the Crow. He tells you the history of Kenya during the struggle for independence and what happened immediately after the end of colonialism. So, if you want to understand a certain part of the history of Kenya, you're reading Ngugi Wa Thiongo's books.
Mm.
So, it's fiction. It is a book that you can read, has humor, you will laugh, but at the same time, he's literally giving you a very vivid kind of picture of what Kenya looked like in that struggle through those few characters and even through those few locations that he focuses on, a microcosm of what Kenya looked like, what the people are fighting during that period in the 50s were going through, and what actually they experienced the years after the independence of Kenya.
Yeah.
It's a really
Um,
powerful style.
yeah, for sure. So what would you say is was your favorite book? I know mine was this one, The River Between. I always keep a copy with me. I have others on my bookshelf here if I was to pan.
Yeah,
I have my little bookshelf here with some of my favorite African writers.
yeah.
But this book right here and Weep Not Child, which was we talked about having been his very first book that he wrote when he was in his early 20s. They became iconic, especially on how they reflect, like you said, post-colonial Kenya. How close to home did these stories hit for you, especially when you're in your high school or in your college years when you're starting out in your early journalism career? Just
Yes.
kind of tell Kenyan stories.
Yeah. So first, I have to say, when it comes to Ngugi's books, maybe it's the same answer I would give when I talk about music. I do have certain types of music that I like a lot, but sometimes I'm not able to tell you that I like this person's song.
The
I like
most.
this one more than the other one. Actually, I
Yeah.
like all of Ngugi Wa Thiongo's books. They are my favorite books, all of them. And the reason is each of them tackles a certain aspect of the themes that resonate with Kenya's post-colonial period and even colonial period. So whether you're reading the Weep Not Child, A Grain of Wheat, what you saw perhaps progressively is that he did encompass a bit more of some of the observations as the years went by, because Kenya also was kind of moving on, and so he had to incorporate other things. So, like for example, when he wrote A Grain of Wheat, definitely there were some other themes he tackled that were not there in Weep Not Child or even A
Mhm.
Grain, The River Between. But here's what I can say: through his writings, as I was growing up, going through, especially secondary school and high school, and becoming more aware of what was happening around us in terms of the political progression, in terms of the economic struggles, and so on and so forth, and came to understand, the class struggles also. I came to appreciate through his books why Kenya was the way it was when I was growing up. There was a struggle for independence. There was a whole movement to first to gain independence from the British colonial rulers, but part of that struggle was entrenched in the idea that once we get our independence, this is our country, we take back our land, and people's aspirations were that, then we shall all
Share
benefit.
in the prosperity.
Yeah, it was like a national cake we're all going to put on the table and cut it into pieces enough for all of us to enjoy. Lo and behold,
Just like the fable of Animal Farm, unfortunately.
exactly. And so Ngugi Wa Thiong'o was actually honestly trying to address the issues by questioning the system, the people who are in charge. Like, what happened? This was what we were fighting
This was
for.
our dream.
What
This was our aspiration. Where
exactly?
did we go wrong? Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And how much, how much of the national cake did everybody have, in the post-colonial Kenya? But also the questions that he was asking, which I think were somehow becoming extremely touchy and sensitive to those in authority, were who are the beneficiaries? And how were they blind to what was happening in the country?
yeah,
Or did they just deliberately turn away from the reality on the ground, which was that a great number of Kenyans continued to live in the same conditions as before independence or during independence, before independence, and continue to experience the suffering, especially after
yeah.
having lost a lot during the struggle for independence.
And we'll touch upon, I guess, theoretically, what Ngugi's novel about the current political landscape or political situation in Kenya would, if he was to write about it, what that novel would be about. But let's go back a little bit to the 70s. I guess it was in 1977 when he was jailed. When I read that one of his boldest moves was that he switched from writing in English to his native Gikuyu. And he argued that colonial education created what we call mental captivity. This is also something that him and I talked about a couple of times. I interviewed him like 3 times over the years, or 4 times. He appeared on my show. He's again argued that the we need to get out of this mental captivity by pushing African children to think in local languages instead of foreign languages. Do you think that that argument still holds weight today in 2025? Are we still struggling with that linguistic legacy?
Well, and first I have to say, by the way, I didn't mention I do have Ngugi's books. I don't have them with me right on the table, but someday maybe we'll come bring them on. The Grain of Wheat, Weep Not Child, and all those. Uh, Ngugi grew up in the village. He grew up in an African village, a proud kid of his homeland. And later he went to school, which at that time the schools actually were literally led or managed by the colonial masters, the British. So education was considered a process of not only empowering us, really, but it was seen as a process of civilizing the African, the savage, and make this person more of a civilized human being. So he went to school, he enjoyed learning, and actually got to have a love for the English language, the language of the master, the language of the colonial powers. But then over time, in his, observation, he came to realize that there was a way in which the language was being used to further colonize you in the most important part, the
Your
mind,
brain.
your
Yeah.
brain. And how did that begin? And I can tell you practically from even I growing up, we went to school, we learned English, and indeed, and I appreciate that I speak English. Now we're able to speak English together. But then we grew up in the environment where, because of how the British colonial powers had viewed our languages, we were made to believe that if you go to school, you're not supposed to speak a local language. You're not supposed to speak your mother tongue, which could be, in my case, Kisii, or in Ngugi's case, Kikuyu. You're not supposed to speak Swahili. You only speak English because it's a sign that you are now becoming educated and civilized. In fact, when we were in primary school, we used to be punished. We were punished if we spoke English within
Right.
the school precinct. So Ngugi Wa Thiongo, in his deep thought, came to look at what that does to you. First, it communicates the idea that your language is inferior. And if your language is inferior, then you are inferior. And if you are convinced in yourself that your language is inferior by extension, you're saying there's something about me, my language, my culture that is inferior, including the naming. We went to, I'm Vincent, you're Jackson. In Kenya growing up, if somebody asks you, what's your name? I say, I'm Makori. Oh, Makori, yeah. Any other name? I say, I'm Barasa Makori.
Mm.
What's your Christian name? It is like, how is, now we came to embrace that. And that's
Yeah,
even Ngũgĩ used to be called James until later on when
yeah.
he and a few other people looked at why should somebody name me and a foreign name that I don't even know the meaning, but consider that a more important name than the one that comes from my people.
Of my
So
ancestors, yeah.
exactly. So some of the things he does or he said do really resonate with me because when he really deconstructs that particular aspect of language, he makes an argument that when somebody convinces you that your language is inferior to the rest of the languages in the world or other languages, he's essentially telling you there's something inferior about your culture.
Right.
But to make a case for him,
It's
Ngũgĩ does
erasure,
not
cultural erasure, yes.
Ngũgĩ does not say you shouldn't speak English.
Mm.
Ngũgĩ does not say you can't write, that you can't speak and communicate and learn in English. What he's saying is, he argues that English should be an addition to the other languages. It should be an addition to the mother tongue, to your original language, because why not? It is your mother tongue is equally powerful, relevant, and as equal as any other language. But you asked
Mhm.
a very important question. Does it really resonate with people today? It is tough because there are people even within Kenya who never really bought into that kind of idea because they feel that by writing in a local language, and for him, not even Kiswahili, which is a very East African unifying language, but his mother tongue, he was becoming like a literally bigot, like he was cutting off people.
Mm.
But Ngũgĩ said, well, I can write in my language and somebody can translate that. What I'm trying to say, and he makes a very powerful argument, which to some degree I really agree with.
Absolutely. If you're writing
I
in your mother tongue, there are certain ways of expression that are very powerful and very
Yes,
distinct to that
yeah,
culture and to that language.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because remember, Ngugi Wa Thiongo, just like some others, grew up speaking the Kikuyu language, for example, or the Gikuyu, as the Kikuyus will call it. He thinks in Kikuyu, he dreams in Kikuyu, when he thinks of a funny expression, or perhaps when he's, building up a character, the people that he grew up used to, and that's how he created those characters. Some
Mm.
of them actually are based on real people, are people in his village, people he saw from the prism of his language. And
Right.
so when he describes them, you describe them better in the language of your heart, the language you grew up speaking. So I think he makes a very powerful case. I really personally don't have any quarrel with him. And I don't see why you can't speak or write in your language and have it translated in English. He's not against. Can I give you an example? I
Yeah.
hope I'm not taking too
No,
much
go
time.
ahead. Yeah, yeah.
Some of my favorite books that I've read outside of, Ngugi Wa Thiongo and African writers. One of them, a small book called The Government Inspector by Nikolai Gogol.
Mm.
The other book, it's a play. Another one is a play called An Enemy of the People by Henrik Ibsen. There are many other books I've read, but those two I'll mention to you because they're some of the funniest and very powerful books that I've read that left such an impression on me. I have them. They are plays actually. They're plays because I read both, full-blown novels and plays. Those books, Government Inspector by Nikolai Gogol, is originally written in Russian,
In Russian, yes.
translated into English. It is one of the funniest plays that I've read, one of the funniest plays that I've watched. But who knew that it was originally written by Nikolai Gogol in Russian?
Yeah.
Henrik Ibsen's book, which is from Sweden, is written originally in Swedish. And that book is powerful to me. I can tell you the whole story. All those two books, I can tell you from beginning to end, and the themes he tackled and how they resonate with where I come from and the things that happen in the political arena and in back, say, in Kenya, I can relate. Yet those books were originally written by those authors in their mother tongue. So what's the problem if Ngugi Wa Thiongo writes in Gikuyu or I write in my mother tongue and then somebody translates it?
We are waiting for a novel in Kisi. So one of the stories that I remember recounting to Ngugi Wa Thiongo at the time when I was interviewing him, we were talking about the new book in which he was again calling for more language education or writing in local languages. So I recounted to him my experience as a high school student, as a literature student who started language advocacy, local language advocacy at a very young age. And the only time I was ever suspended from school, I was in boarding school, was the time when I wrote an article in a school newspaper of which I was the editor-in-chief, opposing a school policy at the time that banned the speaking of local languages on the campus at school. And as a person at the time, I was I think the chairman of the literature club. I was the chairman of the debating club, and my teacher was taken aback. I was also the editor-in-chief of a school newspaper. I remember it was called Ogampas. I don't know where that name came from, but I wrote about it. And at the time, we used to write our little articles and then pin them on the school board, and kids would come and read, and everybody's kind of like lining up to read.
Mm-hmm.
So I took this stand against this new policy. I speak many local languages, so I think that was one of the languages they caught me speaking with a friend of mine, and as part of a punishment, they would give you a bone, like a big skull, and you have to wear it on on your neck as a mark of. I mean, it's crazy thinking about it right
Yeah.
now. Like
Yeah.
being punished for speaking your language, you would walk with it and basically be embarrassed in front of everybody for being the person who did not speak English on campus. And so I refused to wear it, you know. And
Rebel.
and the response was that to make to they used me as an example, so they suspended me for 2 weeks from school. So and it was a boarding school, like very rural, parts of Uganda. I remember the time, and just to leave that school to get to get home was just in itself like 8 hours of driving in different,
Mm.
and just it I remember going back home, I felt a sense of pride for standing up for myself and for my language, or for the other local languages. And I did share that experience with Ngugi Wa Thiongo. He found it quite interesting, and I felt proud that I was actually sharing this with Ngugi Wa Thiongo, because at the time, I remember reading again his books and his characters, and they would resonate with me so deeply. And these anti-colonial, Pan-African themes that were kind of woven through his books. That's the type of influence he had on me.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going back to the humiliation. We used to be given something called a disc. Uh,
Yeah.
for us, it was made of wood. It didn't look so bad, but it was just meant to make sure they track how many people spoke any other
Wait, so
language.
you also had the same policy at school?
Yes, we have the same policy. You're not supposed to speak any other language except English. And so if I find you, if I speaking any other language, I'll be given a disc. It was a piece of wood, and then I have it. If I hear somebody speaking either Swahili or any other language, I give it to him so that at the end of the day, they will start calling on who has the disc last year. Where did you get it from? So everybody who had it comes forward, and we get punished. Now,
Wow.
here's the deal. To get punished for speaking the language of your mother,
Yeah.
the language of your people, the language of your father, when you think about it, actually, it was such a disservice to our families, our communities. And I do regret that there are many young people, even people my generation, older people, who may not speak articulately their mother tongue, or even, in our case, even Swahili, except those who pursued it as a study,
Yeah.
because it was forbidden and it was considered inferior as a language.
Mhm.
And
Up
Google,
to now, up to now,
yeah,
they're not able to, even when they're speaking to their children right now. Obviously, many of them are in our generation. They have kids, and when they speak to their children, they're speaking in English. Obviously,
yeah,
that's different for us who are in the diaspora. It's a little more difficult.
yeah.
But I've seen that in many African households, especially middle class.
Yeah.
households that are it's a marker of prosperity to speak to
Yeah.
your child
Yeah.
in the language in English or in
Yeah.
French.
And I know it. I mean, if we go to Kenya today with you, you'll see that any kid coming out of a nice looking car and dressed in a certain way, he will be speaking English.
Yeah,
You want to hear kids speak either in local language or some other street language or some dialect, like the Sheng. Then you go to the poorer neighborhood, and
yeah.
so that is become a mark of class. Speaking a foreign language is a mark of class. But here's the deal. When I think about it so deeply, really, Ngũgĩ makes, for me, it really makes a powerful case. For example, I have seen people become celebrities in Kenya, white people from Britain, from America, just because they can speak Swahili.
Yeah,
And they will be put on television, they'll be on radios, and
right.
everybody's so excited because it's
Yeah.
like heroes. They speak Swahili.
That's the irony of it. Like
Yeah,
if you a non-Kenyan or
yeah,
somebody coming from the West and
yeah,
you go back and you're living in Africa and you
yeah.
speak you somehow you start speaking the local language, you become a
Oh,
local celebrity and everybody
totally.
celebrates you and praises
Celebrating.
you.
People have actually become even decided to start huge YouTube channels and become very successful because they
Yeah,
spoke Swahili, or even take it further, they spoke another African or Kenyan language.
yeah,
But then, when you think about it, nobody makes a big issue out of us speaking English and maybe German and maybe French, some other people. The French, the Germans, I lived in Germany, they don't care if you speak their language. They're okay with it. They'll be like, oh, you speak German, yeah, your accent is a little off, you know? They'll instead look for faults in how you speak.
yeah,
Or here nobody says, oh my God, you speak English. Rather, it will be, oh, that
mm,
accent, where's that from? Very interesting accent, you know? But nobody thinks we have achieved a lot by
yeah, yeah,
speaking
yeah.
some other language. But we,
Absolutely. I mean, that's the irony, man. It's so sad. And
Exactly.
Ngugi was on to something, unfortunately.
Yeah,
That was way back when you
yeah,
think about it, 1977. I think that's when
exactly.
that was when he was jailed
Yeah,
for writing that play in Gikuyu.
yeah.
Um, uh,
Gahikandenda
yeah. But
and Satan.
what was the political climate like at the time?
Ngogi actually was a very courageous man. Because he wrote those books, which, when you think about them, they're actually asking legitimate questions. He was speaking from the position of his uncles, himself, the people who went through all this, and he was saying, "What's going on?" The reason why he got even in trouble is because by writing in the Gikuyu language, and that time they had been banned from actually performing the plays at the National Theatre, decided to do it in the local language. And his logic was very simple. I'm writing about the common folk. I'm writing about our people. Shouldn't we
Them.
write in the
And
language
for
they
them.
understand?
Yeah, not just about them, but also for them.
It's also for them so they
Yeah.
can appreciate it. Why would I write a story about the people from my village and have it in English and be performed in English language at the National Theatre? So they decided to take theatre to the people. In fact, that's how the so-called traveling theatre was born. In our universities, we started having traveling theatre where you actually take theatre to the people, and they were being performed in Gikuyu language. And that time, the in fact, the person was in power was a person from the same community as Ngugi Wa Thiongo, Jomo Kenyatta. But there was so much sensitivity in the whole idea of reminding people that right now your lot is doing so badly, not because of the colonialists anymore, but it's because of who is in power today, who is supposed to have to be making your life much better, who is supposed to have ensured that we are all sharing the national cake. And the authorities were completely intolerant to that kind of, they thought it's poisoning the minds of the people, the
Yeah.
minds of the masses. So it was a tough time because at that time we were
Do you think
under.
if he had written it in English, they would have had the same reaction?
Not too much.
one of
I mean,
the
to some
main worries
degree,
about, the leaders during that time or the political climate at the time was that they were worried about uh, protests from the masses, from the wider masses,
yes.
not necessarily the learned or the urban population that spoke English, but if you were able to tap into the grievances and speak to the grievances and of the village man,
Yeah.
the people in the rural areas, then you're reaching like 90% of the
I
population.
mean, the message was still a message that was irritating to the authorities. But what happened at that time is that, the elites already had their own level of understanding of the issues, and they were already protesting, especially at the universities like University of Nairobi. He wasn't the only person who got in trouble. We had several scholars, several lecturers and professors who were involved in agitation for change, who were pushing back and criticizing the authorities at that time. And there was a small class of them. But the authorities were very, very concerned about anybody who could kind of break down this information to the masses because it was easier to deal with the elitists. So many professors were arrested and detained. So many were jailed. A few people were, died. A few people went to exile. Some were lawyers. Some were, professors of literature and theater and all that. But when Ngugi took this message to the masses, it was immediate. The reaction was so immediate
Mm,
because now, if you arouse the masses, even the armies cannot hold them back. It
absolutely.
was easier to deal with the elites who are already, troublemakers, who are seen as troublemakers, because they would just take them, detain them, jail them, or scare them into going into exile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or scare them into compliance.
Yeah, some of
Yeah.
them they just decided to not get in trouble and decided to, not venture into that kind of path.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
Ngugi really stood up and really stood on his own and really like at the time when the political climate was disfavorable to that type of protest
yeah.
or pushing back. So let me ask you when you think of his full body of work, from his novels to his political essays and plays. How do you describe the overall contribution, his overall contribution to Kenya's cultural and political life? And do you think young Kenyans today truly understand what he stood for? And I guess as now we're speaking of him in the past since he passed away. Do you think that we need, so Kenyans need, or Africans need to keep his legacy alive, not just in literature, but also in the national conversation?
Yeah, thought leaders are a very critical part of society. When you read the entire repertoire of Ngugi's books, as I said, it's almost like you are reading the history of Kenya, post-colonial Kenya, and it helps you to really understand what is the root of some of the issues that we are dealing with today. The country started on the wrong footing. And that is what Ngugi was pointing out, right from the whole idea of the colonization of the mind, but also the betrayal of the masses by the few who held the positions of power immediately after independence. So the big question is, did anything ever change? Or where we are today, some of the critical issues that we're talking about, do they still have resonance with what happens immediately after Kenya gained independence? So the sad part I can say is that there's a whole generation of people who may not be studying Ngugi Wa Thiongo's books, or may not have been encouraged, especially in Kenya, to study Ngugi Wa Thiongo's books, um, partially because maybe he was seen as a radical. But when you look closely at his messaging, it helps people to understand where they come from, why situations or things are the way they are, and also the fact that he wasn't just a writer of fiction, but also he had he also, I mean, he didn't just write to criticize. the political establishment. But also Ngugi's bigger message, which resonates beyond Kenya, is that of saying we need to fight against mental colonization, mental slavery, which has persisted, but in so many ways. Because when you think about it, people just think Ngugi is talking about just the language. He uses the language to tell you a language is one aspect.
It's just a vehicle.
It's a vehicle
Yeah.
of colonizing you. And it says, if you can convince somebody that their language is wrong, then you give them their names because you tell them their naming system is backward, theirs is superior. Then you also influence their thought process. And up to today, we are seeing a lot of that influence where we even have been, some of our people are convinced, whether they know it or not, that they are an inferior race, that they are actually, even just if they can have an association with a person of another culture, especially Western culture, they feel like they have elevated themselves. They are a bit better now because I have a white friend or I have a person, nothing wrong with having a white friend or a niche Asian friend or any other friend. But the concept, the whole idea that a person from our culture should feel that they get elevated to a more superior or more significant place on earth by associating with a person from another culture because he perceives himself to be a bit on the lower level in the ranking of human beings. It's a very sad, sad reality. And that is exactly the reason why Ngugi Wa Thiongo's message should be very powerful and should be preserved and also communicated with the younger generation today.
And we should also say that he very much deserved the Nobel Prize for Literature that he did not win, that we so many times campaigned for him to get, but he really didn't care so much. I think, said that for him, he won the people's minds. He was writing for the people. He didn't really care for these awards.
My final word could be, unfortunately, Ngugi, if he was to write a book, if he hadn't died, I'm afraid that his book would not sound any different than, you know, a grain of wheat or
1977.
even a weep not child,
Yeah,
only just different times. It's unfortunate that some things have actually remained the same while certain things have changed, but there are things that have remained the same, and I'm sure Ngugi would have really still highlighted some of the issues, which still would be an irritating message to some of those
in
in
power.
positions of power. Yeah,
Yeah. Some of those that are used to idolize him when they were not in positions of power.
exactly.
Look at
When they got there,
yes,
now he's not their friend. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, but
Absolutely.
he was a great guy. Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Vincent, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We'll
Thanks a
reconvene
lot,
again.
Jackson. Let's
Yes,
do it again.
salute, my brother.
Thanks, bro.
Cheers.